Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. Today we have an episode we've been looking forward to for ages because we're finally plunge diving into the world of kingfishers. Joining us is Jenna Mccullough, a true kingfisher expert who has studied these incredible birds in depth. Jenna and Shannon have worked together, and right now they're both involved in the Kingfisher exhibit happening at the Field Museum, so this conversation couldn't be more timely. There's so much to talk about. Kingfishers are found all over the globe, and believe it or not all of them even dive for their food. Rather than focus on one specific kingfisher, this episode we talk about a number of kingfishers and kingfishers in general. These birds are some of the most colorful, fascinating creatures out there, and it was so much fun to finally spend an episode celebrating everything that makes kingfishers so special. Okay, go grab your binoculars and let's get into it. I feel like we've been wanting to talk kingfishers we've been doing this podcast for almost 2 years now, and this is actually our first kingfisher episode, and I think we were waiting to get you on, Jenna, and also just to really get somebody who knows how to talk about kingfishers and jump into all the different species. So we're thrilled to have you on. And then is there something coming up on the Field Museum about kingfishers as well?
Yeah, on June 28th, I think, the Field Museum is going to open a tiny public exhibition on kingfishers in our science hub. So there'll be some specimens out, some imaging associated with diving kingfishers and why we study diving kingfishers. What's the point of studying a diving bird like this? So there's, and Jenna will come. When she comes, she'll be on the floor talking to people about what she does. And it'll be there for 6 months. So anybody who comes to the museum in from July through the end of the year, will be able to come and see a few kingfishers. And maybe one of us, the docents, and the educators, are trained in kingfishers. I'm doing that right now so that they don't say too many wrong things, although they might say wrong things because I don't say right things all the time. But anyway, and there'll be guided experiences in there with either one of us, any of us who could be in there, but also with the education staff in the museum. So it's been really fun. It's always fun to work with exhibition staff. In fact, I hope we get one of the exhibition developers on with us sometime in the next little while to talk about the process. Because it's a different process when you translate, just like we were talking about before about science communication. It's a different process when you talk to other professionals who are experts and trained in communication about communication. As they always tell me, I use too many words. So the trick is always to take what you say and okay, we're going to say that in 60 words. I'm like, that's not possible. But it is, and they do. So it's a really good experience, I think, to work in teams with people who do completely different things from what you do. They're fun, too.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it because I've actually never done any kind of exhibits. And so this is my first experience, so I'm really excited to be a part of it.
So Jenna, I wanted to ask you what was it that made you decide you wanted to go to graduate school and not just watch birds, and then how'd you get to kingfishers?
Well, I actually knew I wanted to be a zoologist when I was really young. There's this fun story that I thought when I was growing up that the only way you could work with animals was actually to be a veterinarian. And I was so young that I kept mispronouncing veterinarian. Some people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grow up. I would say I want to be a vegetarian. And so that's been a fun little thing. But I knew I wanted to get a PhD when I was in 5th grade. And so I just had to decide what is it going to be about? Is it going to be primates or animals? I knew I wanted to do some kind of wildlife research. And I hated birds at this time. And my freshman year of college, I knew that I want to study animals. And so I sent out a bunch of emails to different people in the wildlife department at the University of Idaho. And only one person responded. And he was like, well, if you want to work with me, first you have to help me with a literature review. And if you prove yourself, then I will give you the keys to this Ford F-150, and you can drive 3 hours away and learn how to band breeding owls, Sawa owls. And so I did that for 4 years. Yeah, so that's actually kind of a foray into birds. I didn't know I was going to be really working with birds. Birds were really annoying to me at that time because, when you're a teenager and you just want to go to the mall and your mom like picks you up and she's like, oh, let's go to the mall. And you start driving past the mall, and then you drive into the middle of nowhere in Idaho to see a snowy owl because there's an eruption and you didn't want to go all the way out there because it's annoying. Maybe, you know, like you don't really want to watch birds as much. So that's the first bird on my eBird list is a snowy owl, actually.
Oh, wow.
So
How did you know
amazing.
about
That's
PhDs when
amazing.
you were 5?
Oh no, I just knew like I'd go to the zoo growing up. So I knew I like and I meant to say 5th grade. If I said 5, I didn't mean that. But yeah, no.
Still young.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I knew that you could be a bird researcher, and then people had told me that you could go into academia and stuff like that.
I
So
had
was like,
no
that's
idea. I didn't
amazing.
even know how people became professors until well after I had a bachelor's degree. Honestly, I knew we called them doctor, but I didn't know why or how. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know anything about independent research.
So that's how I got into Kingfishers.
Yeah.
Someone else said, hey, do you want to work on Kingfishers? And I said, yeah. And then I never left.
But that's why kingfishers are so cool, because there's almost nothing you can't study in kingfishers, right? They
Yeah.
can be a model system for virtually everything in birds that you might want to study.
Yes. Maybe not frugivory, but so funny, actually.
I was going to say
doing
nectar
some-
feeding.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
fine.
Of the few things, there are some things. Yeah. But no, they're great. And so many people love them because they are, you know, they're everywhere. They're a cosmopolitan group. They're found on every continent except Antarctica. And so many people have, you know, had an emotional connection to kingfishers. Even my dad, we were just walking the dogs. They happened to find a kingfisher wrapped in fishing wire. This is before I ever was even close to going to graduate school. And he has this emotional experience of saving this bird that was drowning in the water and cutting the fishing wire around it to be able to release it. And so even apart from the fact that his daughter is a PhD scientist on kingfishers, he has had that experience. And I think a lot of people, maybe not every single person, but a lot of people have either seen it or heard of them because they're everywhere. At least, I mean, they're kind of around water, but
So if someone asked you what a kingfisher was, what do you tell them when they ask you what a kingfisher is?
it's not just plunge diving. Because so many people are like, kingfishers, they eat fish. And I always say, not all kingfishers eat fish. And for this podcast, I went and I counted all the species that do plunge diving. And I found
good
out that
for you.
actually more species don't plunge dive than
Yes.
plunge dive.
That's right. So
Did you
what is your
nothing?
number?
Not in,
Because
not
I
in,
have.
not in Europe.
Oh, no, I did worldwide. I
No,
wanted
but
to
what-
the
what-
full-
what it-
okay.
But the name I think comes from a probably European origin where
I would love to tell you more about that, John, because it is very European centric. So I looked into it. Kingfisher comes from 2 different spots. The king color apparently comes from the blue, the royal blue of the common kingfisher. They kind of have this really brilliant blue back, and it's this royal blue. And so apparently King George III had sent out this thing saying, I want to find the most royal color. So all these clothiers came to him and said, look at these beautiful colors. And he chose this brilliant blue color. And that just so happens to kind of match that blue cloak of the common kingfisher. And the fisher part comes from the fact that the kingfisher that is the most predominant in Europe, actually the only one, is the common kingfisher. And that is a plunge diving species.
Okay, Jenna, what's your number of plunge divers?
I specifically for my number, they had to, in their diet on Birds of the World, had to say plunge diving. Now, if it says 8 fish,
Yes.
the thing is that I didn't always count it as plunge diving because there's
That's
lots of birds that
exactly
eat fish that don't plunge dive.
wait a minute.
So
ha-
this
ha-
conversation, the exhibitions, people can't understand. They're like, how do you not know? I'm like, this is not an easy as a question as you think it is to know, because diving is different than plunge diving. And so I want to say how many plunge divers there are, not how many fish eaters there are, and not how many divers there are, because Guam kingfishers actually dive just like they're plunge diving, but they don't go into the water. They go
I'm trying
pick up
to
whatever prey.
So the implication here is that
But we're getting away from the number, John. Just a
Okay.
second.
I counted 39 out of 118 species, which is 33% plunge dive.
Yeah, I have 42 because,
Oh.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
but that's
I have
gonna
a
be
list.
different. I do too.
We can look at that. I literally today just went through all the species and
That's
was like,
what I did.
I'm
All right,
still
so
trying.
then
I'm
we'll
still
have to
trying to
compare
figure
notes.
out how you catch fish without diving.
does a herring
Plunge diving
dive?
is different. Yes, exactly. Plunge diving is different than diving, John.
Wait, so explain that.
Plunge diving is diving from height, right? A lot of birds will eat
Okay.
fish, but they don't dive in the water for real, or if they do, it's like just a little bit. But we're talking about things that like are on a perch and go direct into the water like that to get their food. That's where I got tripped up, Jenna, is trying to figure out what I'm talking about. That's when I realized we had to say plunge diving and not diving.
Oh, I was just fish eating versus diving. That was my number.
Okay.
Or that's how I got it.
There we go. There's the
Because like there's
discrepancy.
lots of birds that eat fish that don't fully submerge themselves. And there might
That's
be
right.
like really close to the surface fish that they can just kind of dip in. You know, like a skimmer, that really long
Yeah,
bill, they just kind of dip it in, but
exactly.
they're not really often going, you know.
They're not going
and
in
they're
the
just kind
water.
of
That I understand, but I'm still trying to envision a kingfisher that does that.
Oh, you'd have to read all the accounts of birds of the world, and then you'd know.
And also there are what might happen is there are 6 that have no data according to that
Yes.
because those are recent splits on Birds of the World, and so the data for their diet comes from the larger species when it was considered to be on all these different islands. But now it's only on one island, and no one has studied the diet of that species on that one island.
I'm envisioning some people taking fish out and trying to see if they'll just come grab them, and then they go into the diet. They get into the literature that way.
What?
All right, I'm probably
I
wrong.
had not thought about that.
I don't even understand what you just said.
But I want to circle back to the name Fisher, actually, Shannon, because
Oh my God,
Kingfisher,
John.
again, is from the European side, because that's the common kingfisher is plunge diving. In the 1800s, even Alfred Russel Wallace, he used the term king hunter because Alfred Russel Wallace was really working in the Indo-Pacific. The ones that are predominant in the Indo-Pacific, they don't always plunge dive. And so they were used as reference as king hunters. And then there's also, I looked up a couple others. There is a name, what is it? Ice bird. Those are like in Germany and other Icelandic countries. And also in Malay, it translates to shrimp king, which is fun. Because there are some that are like very more like mangroves in crustaceans. So yeah. King kind of comes from that blue color, King George, royal blue, and then Fisher really is all of the scientists that were doing the taxonomy for these birds in the 1700s, 1800s. They lived in Europe. The one that plunge dives is in Europe. But as we already know, 61%, at least by my count, don't plunge dive. So they should be called king hunters, is what I'm saying.
Well,
should
there we
bring that
go.
back.
Well, we'll see how well our podcast is doing with respect to changing people's abilities to. There we go. I'm getting the T-shirts made tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
So
going to
when
be
it-
disappointed, John.
Shannon, to circle back to your question, how would I describe what a kingfisher is? I'm going to say it is a medium-sized bird that's really brightly colored, that has a big honking bill, like proportionally ridiculously large to its body, and is one of the few birds that has a really large bill and teeny, teeny, tiny legs. So they have these just wimpy sized legs and these big old bills. And I kind of always describe them like, you know, when we think of predators, we think of raptors, you know, like a hawk, and they have these really pointy, sharp bills and these like needle-like claws. And kingfishers are predators, they're hunters, but they don't have that. And so instead of, which I think is a little bit, you know, more intense, instead of putting their claws into their prey, they catch them And then in their big bill, they just beat them on a rock or on a branch until it's stunned or dead, and then they eat them. So I think that's a little bit more metal of a way to ingest your prey. And so when it comes to like, you know, that, I would say kingfishers are pretty cool in that way. And a little bit more violent, I think. It's not like a butcher bird where they're just impaling them on thorns.
I think of them having big heads too, not just big bills. I think proportional for their bodies. They have wimpy, you're right, little tiny legs, but they have big heads. I think the big-headedness seems to me to cross whether you dive or not. So I think that you don't have to dive to have a big head, proportionally big head.
I think the opposite, actually. The ones that are diving kind of have a smaller head to the rest of their body. I mean, think of a kookaburra's head. It's a big head. I mean, its bill's a little bit smaller proportionally. But like Todiramphus, the genus that I studied for my dissertation, they have a big bill. They're not plunge divers, and their heads are so honking big. So, yeah. But they're really cool because they also have really cool foot morphology too. So when we think about foot morphology across all like 11,000 species of birds, kingfishers are kind of the poster child of this one particular foot morphology called syndactyly, which means two of their toes are fused together. So a lot of birds will have 3 forward-facing toes, and their first toe is like, I can't do it on my hand, is like backwards facing. And so it's like perching birds, but these guys have their second and third digits fused. But what's cool about that is actually pygmy kingfishers. So there's 3 main groups of kingfishers. Sorry, there's 3 groups of kingfishers. They sometimes don't have syndactyly, so 4 toes. And that really threw Victorian taxonomists for a big wild ride, because talking about toes on pygmy kingfishers was a lot has been said about their toes.
That's the history of numbering toes has always made me laugh in birds when you look at the history of how you count toes, because there's a lot of controversy about which one's fused, and people have fought for decades, maybe actually over a century. People have fought about which toes are actually fused in some birds that fuse toes. So you'd think you wouldn't get much more trivial than that. But
when it comes to foot stuff, the scutellation patterns on bird feet also is just like that. Like, it's this kind of scutellation pattern, which really scuttles, for people who aren't familiar with scutellation. If you think of like a pigeon's foot, I'm sure we've all seen pigeon's feet. There's sometimes like looks like there's little plates on it. They're not like our skin, not smooth. And so those little like keratin plates, morphologists will be like, oh, this type of pattern is different than the other one. It means this thing. So that's not the case in kingfishers. There's no scuttles on kingfisher legs, just in case anyone wanted to know.
But the only way you can understand that is through looking at the tree of life. That's the thing that gives you the clue as to how, why, and when things might have fused. So yeah, it is amazing to me that ornithologists, that we care this much about the fusion of toes. Although that toes fuse at all is really pretty cool.
Shannon, can I also tell you something, one of my favorite things about the names of kingfishers? I'm going to totally monopolize this conversation, but one of my favorite things about kingfishers is their names and the history of how we got the genus names. So at the time that Linnaeus was naming all the bird families, he was pulling, him and like a bunch of other taxonomists were pulling names out of like Greek mythology and like Latin names and stuff like this. And so a lot of the genus names in kingfishers come from a famous epic poem called the Myth of Halcyon, which is from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And so this was actually published in 8 AD. And so kind of the history of this is this Greek myth where there are these 2 people. So the first one is Alcyone. She's the granddaughter of Poseidon, and she is married in a loving relationship with King Ceyx. And they are seafaring people, and they love each other so much that the gods got jealous because they were comparing their love to as amazing as Zeus and Hera. And so they got angry. They sent a storm. It caused Ceyx, he is a seafaring king, to die. And Alcyone finds out that he's dead. His body washes up on the shore, and she so sadly throws herself off of a cliff to join him in death. And then because of this, the Greek gods change their opinion. Now they're like, oh, we want to honor these two, their beautiful love story, now that we've caused them to be sad, and change them into kingfishers. So Alcyone, plunge diving into the ocean, and then because Alcyone is this granddaughter of Poseidon, her father is the I think god of the wind. He sends a period of calm storms. There's like no storms, and that was like halcyon days, which is now kind of associated with a period of calm in the storm. So peace among chaos.
Wait, is there anything about joined toes?
No, she didn't actually. No.
I'm disappointed in Linnaeus. I'm not sure.
Oh gosh, he didn't even think about that.
The Greek imagination wasn't what you thought it was, John. I'm sorry. You burst your bubble.
Here's the thing: is they probably thought all of them had 3 toes because the only one that's in Europe.
Yeah, Europe does. Yeah,
had
that's
3
true.
toes.
Three
There you go.
toes. Yeah.
They hadn't even
Although-
experienced the possibility of having 4 toes.
Admittedly, the one in Europe is really pretty. So at least they're like, because in North America, ours are not so pretty.
Shame,
No offense
Shannon.
to them.
Shame. It's not
Comparatively
the
speaking, I didn't say their behaviors weren't interesting, but they're not exactly pretty.
Have you
in the
never
same
seen an
way.
American pygmy kingfisher? They are beautiful. A little teeny tiny green jewel in the forest.
Yeah.
I'm just joking with you. They are prettier. But I wanted to say, so a lot of the genus names come from these 2 people. So Ceyx is a pygmy kingfisher genus. Alcedo. So wait, the ones from Ceyx include Ceyx, Clytoceyx, Surreal, Megasurreal, Chlorosurreal, all for King Ceyx. And then for Alcyone, Halcyon, Alcedo, Lacido, Dacilo. So that's kind of fun that they're all named after that. So I really enjoyed that little tidbit. When I found out, I was like, oh, it made me much happier to, I was already happy to study kingfishers, but it made me a little bit more happier. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
So are belted kingfishers the only North American kingfisher?
No, there is
No.
actually, we have belted kingfisher, ringed kingfisher, and green kingfisher that can occur in the borders of the U.S. Now, belted kingfisher can be as far north as like breeding in northern Alaska. It goes down to breeding in Florida. And then green kingfisher and ringed kingfisher are really just in that southern tip of Texas. And then there's the genus Chlorosurreal, named after King Ceyx. That is only in Central and South America. So we have 2 megasurreals. So we have megasurreal Alcyon, belted kingfisher. And then we have megasurreal torquata, which is ringed kingfisher. And that gets down into South America. And then I think we have 4 species. So a total of 6 species of kingfisher in North and South America. So all other ones, 118 species, 112 are not in North America. So
Wow.
At least those ones all dive, though. So they have the coolest behaviors. They have among the coolest.
You mean the North American
the
one?
people
diving
listening
part.
can't see me roll my eyes.
Yes. They can
Okay.
feel it.
Hopefully they watched the video for that one. Counterpoint.
Uh-oh.
I have a picture of a kookaburra, a laughing kookaburra, eating a sacred kingfisher. They're in the same subfamily. I had it in my master's defense for the slide where I say not all kingfishers eat fish. And I literally has that picture of it's in the sacred kingfisher is dead. It's already been, slammed to the ground like, kookaburras do, all kingfishers do. And I dare you to find another example of subfamily predation. Subfamily.
Good point.
It's
Wait, so did
incredible.
it-
Was that
Did
that
it hunted
aberrant
it and-
behavior?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Do you have
Is that
video of the whole
common
thing?
or?
No, I just have a picture. I'll show it to you. Maybe we can have it in some kind of the notes or something because it's amazing. I mean, yes, subfamily, it doesn't happen. Like, what hawk eats another hawk?
Right.
I do want to add because I have a list of all non-fish options that I found.
Oh, cool.
That might be enjoyable. All right. So,
Yeah.
first off, again, not all kingfishers eat fish. A lot of them do. I think I said, 39 on my count eat fish. And so there has actually really been really cool examples. So pied kingfisher, which is a black and white kingfisher in Africa, actually has been observed 2 miles off the coast of Africa, plunge diving for fish in the ocean, eating it on the wing, and then just still like going about its business. So for one, that's pretty extreme plunge diving birds. Now we get away from the pretty cool plunge diving aspect of kingfishers. There's a lot of them that don't eat fish. So of cases, I went through all of their different diets today. Obviously fish, lizards, snakes, frogs, salamanders, other birds. So again, the kookaburra and the subfamily predation. There's actually one other case that I found of subfamily predation in kingfishers. It was a gray-headed kingfisher in Southeast Asia. It's not subfamily, it's suborder. Eating merops bee eaters. So kingfishers are in the family Alcedinidae in their larger respective order. It includes bee eaters, toadies, motmots, rollers, and so it's eating a bee eater. Fun fact, they also have been shown to eat bees. So bee eaters aren't even that exciting because kingfishers eat bees. Crabs, rodents, squirrels, cockroaches. There's one that specializes on worms. That's one of my favorite. That's a shovel-billed kingfisher.
Yeah.
Spiders and venomous centipedes. So I've done work in the Pacific, and one of the things that I found terrifying about the Pacific were the Scolopendrous centipedes, the genus of giant centipede. They're like this long. Sorry for the listeners. It's like a foot long. It terrifies grown men. They scream when they see them because they're super venomous. And there's tons of pictures of kingfishers just eating them and not caring. Oh. Venomous snakes. A kookaburra has eaten a meter-long snake. Isn't it incredible? And then also, just to make it more exciting, scorpions, but they also eat fruits. So belted kingfishers have been observed eating berries and then oil palm fruits by a blue-breasted kingfisher in Africa. So it's really running the gamut of things. So they'll eat whatever they can put their mouths on, I think.
Yeah, is there anything they won't eat? I'm trying to think, like, what did we not cover?
Yeah,
it's kind of hard when they...
I don't think they...
Leaves.
There's no nectar or flower.
Nectar?
Do they eat anything furry?
Young fruit bats, actually, and squirrels, and tons of rodents. Squirrels. You'll see lots of rodents, especially kookaburras.
Young fruit bats have to be a delicacy. That's like those things have to be really good.
I'm sure they're juicy.
They're fed on fruit, so they're going to be.
They're fed on fruit. That's a good point.
They probably aren't. Was it the word for being blood obligate diets? What is that?
Sanguinous or
yeah, it's something like that. I always forget it.
Yeah, I don't think there are any vampire kingfishers. No.
Not yet.
Oh,
not yet.
Not yet.
Actually, give them time, I suppose.
If I was going to choose one, it was going to be the kookaburra.
We just need to pay Jenna to get back out into the field for a while. She'll find something.
Yeah.
So
and
the other things to know about kingfishers before we move to specific species is that the way they feed influences a lot of aspects of their morphology. So it influences the shape of the head, the shape of the beak. If you're going to dive into the water, you have to do something to protect yourself from the forces of diving. And given that they can be diving at 40 kilometers an hour, that's a pretty significant hit into the water. So they have parts of their bodies that help them with that. And if you look at at some of the best pictures that I didn't take any of them, of course, but they're almost like divers that would get a perfect 10 in the Olympics because they go into the water so cleanly and make virtually no ripples, which you don't want to announce you're coming if you're going into the water to eat fish. So, okay. But the pictures they're so incredibly graceful, and the water isn't moving at all when they're going into the water. It's absolutely spectacular. And there are lots of pictures and some really great videos online that you can go look at of the birds doing that. And the other thing I learned with respect to this kind of right away when Chattel Eisen started CT scanning these birds is that even though the outsides of their beaks are really important in that, it turns out there's more variability at the bones underneath the keratin part of their beak than there is in the beaks themselves, which, until we started doing things like CT scanning, we just didn't really know about things like that. And so that was really fascinating to me. And then the other thing, you cannot leave kingfishers without talking about their importance for, in a bioengineering sense, which is that beak was the inspiration for the Japanese train engineers to redesign the bullet train, which bullet train, when it would go through tunnels, when it came out the other side of the tunnel, it made booms so loud that the people in the countryside could hear it 400 kilometers away from the tunnels. And they said, no, you may not do this. And so the engineers went back to the drawing board, and one of the lead engineers was friends with another engineer who was a bird watcher, and so they started looking at nature for solutions to this. And the fact that the kingfishers go into the water with so little disruption to the water was the inspiration for them to taper the nose of is that what the train front is called? Well, anyways, I'm calling it a nose. I don't know.
I think it is the nose.
But they tapered the nose to match a diving kingfisher's beak. And when they did that, it changed the way the air flows around the front of the train, and it stopped the booms. So, nature has solved a lot of problems in its 3.5 billion years of life on Earth, and humans could learn from the evolutionary process. And one of the things I want to learn from that process is how kingfishers protect their brains when they smash into the water like that. What is it that's happening? We know from the genomics work that we've all been a part of that the gene under the set of genes there's a set of genes that are under strongest selection in kingfishers, coordinated selection in the ones that dive. And the most significant one is a MAPT gene, MAPT, and it codes for tau proteins. And those are the proteins that you hear about in football players whose brains get tangled, neurons in them, when they have CTE, or the tangles of Alzheimer's, or from breakdowns in these proteins. So instead of your neurons being all nice and orderly, it breaks them down, and the neurons form these tangles that are visible once you section the brains of people who have these ailments. And so kingfishers don't seem to do that. So what is it that the mutations in these genes confer on their brains to either fix a problem or to stop one from happening?
Are those same genes also present in woodpeckers? Because I also recently learned that some kingfishers will ram against a tree when they're excavating their cavities, because almost all of them are cavity nesters,
nesting,
whether or not they're like digging in banks, but also in trees too. So
woodpeckers, we had people borrow woodpecker specimens from Boston University, the lead group that still is studying brain injuries in humans, so that big CTE people are at Boston University, and they asked to borrow specimens of woodpeckers that hit buildings. And not because the hitting of the building would cause a problem, although it did, they died, but they wanted to scan their brains to see whether or not there were tangles in the brains, and they have to have fresher material so that they can do the staining that they need to reveal the proteins inside the brain. And so they did that.
I would think
And
that
they did
kingfishers would
find-
make more sense, actually, for that kind of research, because if you think about football, you're not hitting your head again like, like a shaking of a baby would cause. But like one hit like every so often, I feel like that's much more similar to what the type of trauma football players would experience. Much more similar to a kingfisher.
Yeah, and so the fact that kingfishers have evolved plunge diving many different times means there's more power in the comparative parts you find between things that dive and things that don't dive. And you don't get that power in woodpeckers. And so they found that woodpeckers, downy woodpecker, did have some tangles, not very many, but it did. But ones that don't peck on trees, at least not very much. Flickers, for example, didn't have tangles in their brains. So, kingfishers haven't been studied in that way. They're not likely to fly into McCormick Place in Chicago and end up in the museum, so that we could actually section their brains to know that. But that certainly is something that's the promise of kingfishers to solve human problems lies in those comparative analyses. And so if you find something that kingfishers do, the way that protein's made, the way it functions, that actually can protect a brain, fix a brain, stop tangles from happening, then you might be able to figure out how to fix it in humans. And actually, this really nice Canadian guy emailed me out of the blue a couple weeks ago saying that he had read this paper, Jenna, that we were involved in, and said he wanted to talk to me about kingfishers and about doing a whole bunch of really interesting things with kingfishers to look at what these proteins are doing. He has a zebrafish model that he can induce brain damage in, and then watch what happens to kingfishers. Watch what happens to these fish, and then he's using certain kinds of drugs, like anti-seizure drugs, for example, to see if he can alleviate the symptoms in the fish. Mm-hmm. So he is really curious as to whether any of these anti-seizure drugs or whatever classes of drugs, and he got a whole bunch of ideas from this paper looking at the genes that he's looking at it the way we wouldn't do because of his own experience, which is why I love science projects. So he has a whole bunch of hypotheses too now about how this might be mediated, and some really cool ways in which he thinks we can study it, including expressing the kingfisher gene inside of the fish before you give it damage, and then looking to see what kinds of things you could treat the brain with to see if you can repair damage, which to me, it's like, that's doesn't even seem real.
That sounds awesome. For one, I think that sounds like such a poster child for why studying biodiversity just like matters so much, how you never really know how it's going to impact other fields, especially interdisciplinary studies like that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get my mind around the fact that the fish is just really a prey item for a kingfisher, and now you're like trying to insert genes from the kingfisher into it. Next thing you know, the fish will be eating kingfishers.
It'll be plunge diving out of the water, reverse.
That's my prediction.
That would be amazing.
Are there any examples of fishes eating seabirds that are just... I know that like koi fish will eat ducklings.
They've definitely been found in the stomachs of big fish, I think.
Yeah. Kevin Feldheim, the Pritzker lab manager, has this thing. He studies sharks, so he wants to think that fish are better than birds, and I always say birds are better than fish. So he has taken it as a life mission to send me pictures of fish eating birds. And there are a lot of fish that eat birds. I don't have enough patience or energy to find all the bird-eating fish, because that would be the rest of our lifetime of birds eating fish. But yeah, he's wrong.
I don't think that one group is better than the other, because then I feel like there's always going to be something like, well, look at this eating this bird. I'd be like, there's 11,000 species of them. Of course, they're going to be eaten by something. And there's always people who bring up pigeons, and so you can't really argue with that.
I'm going to guess that fish always taste better than kingfishers.
Not enough. I
Well,
love
the thing
hearing
with
about that
kingfishers
stuff.
is that there's a kingfisher that's particularly famous for causing and ending someone's career that shouldn't have been ended.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that was the Bougainville mustache kingfisher, and it just this is like what 2015. It completely blew up, and there's a
what
bunch of
happened?
public outcry.
Wait, what happened? Did
A
someone
collect-
eat something?
No, they
Can we
So
talk about this on the
there was a
podcast?
American Museum team that collecting birds in Guadalcanal, which is the capital island of the Solomon Islands. The reason why no one has gone there is because for the last, since the Whitney South Seas expedition, which was a major ornithological expedition across the Pacific, it laid the foundation of what we know about island birds in the Pacific. That isn't Hawaii. And so they collected birds all throughout these islands, and then no one really studied them for, 100 years. And so this is one of the first times that people had gone to these islands. And the reason why no one does research on these islands sometimes is because you don't always know who owns the land. How do you get proper permission if no one knows who owns the land? So they got the permission. It was really difficult. They had helicopters to get to these really remote islands and remote areas in the islands. And so they caught this one bird that just hadn't happened to be seen since the 1920s. And so he got excited. He sent a picture to his people back at the American Museum, and the social media person put it online on their Twitter or Facebook or something like that. And then someone said, it was just a picture of them holding the bird. It wasn't even the guy's face, it was just his hand. And they're like, we got one, the first one in 100 years. And then someone was like, did you guys set it free? And you're like, no, we made a specimen of it. And then everyone was like, how could you kill this critically endangered bird? And it's just, no one has been there for 100 years. It's not that it's endangered. But then everyone's like, how could you know? You haven't been there for 100 years. So it just kind of is like this big thing. So it kind of ended this guy's career. And he's actually has done a ton of research and conservation in the Solomon Islands. And so he didn't even know any of this was happening. He comes back from the field work, and he's been doxxed online. He's effectively almost fired because, again, he's just doing his job, but someone else just made him famous. And then everyone, there's New York Times articles written about this bird. Yeah, so that was...
He got death threats. This is not just mild things.
terrible.
He had
Oh
to
my gosh.
leave his home with his family. They had to
That's terrible.
leave and go very underground to keep themselves saved.
Oh my
that
gosh.
bird, I extracted the DNA for that bird because it's a kingfisher. And so I have measured that bird. I've seen the one specimen of it, and it's kept in a very specific spot, the American Museum, in a locked case, and because it's just like this omen of poor communication, poor social media management, and the complete dissolution of someone's career, who again has done so much for conservation in the Pacific.
Yeah. Oh, what a shame.
Yeah. Can I
that's
leave all
kind
this in? This is really interesting. Can I?
Shannon and John,
Or-
I'm fine
or-
explaining that.
It's in the public. Anybody can search the New York Times articles and see it. Semi-balanced, I would say. Most of these stories are not told. It's too sensationalized in a way that doesn't serve the birds or people or the environment very, very well. Most of these things are nuanced, right? It took them years to get the permission to go there, and it took hundreds of thousands of dollars for them to get to those places because they're so remote. We don't go into the field willy-nilly and do things like this.
Well, and the goal of collecting that bird was actually to know enough about the species. The male had never actually been collected. And so, there's just, the goal there was conservation of those kingfishers over time through collecting that individual. And that's a hard thing to get across to people. And it's understandable that some people won't understand that, but at the same time, that was the motivation.
You can't conserve things you don't know, right? So you have to know before you can conserve things. You have to know what diversity is in a place. You have to know how things live in a place before you can know what to provide them so that the species can stay on Earth.
So just from that ornithological expedition that I mentioned, the Whitney Sassees expedition, we've known that some of those species have gone extinct since in the 100 years. So like choiseul pigeon is a ground pigeon. And
This is the first surveys that were done back in the 20s, 30s. Yeah.
Yes, it was between 1921 to like 1937, 36, I don't know, something like that. And it was a huge expedition. It was like one of the longest expeditions. And they were on this boat. It was amazing. It was actually Ernst Mayr, who, I love telling the story. Ernst Mayr, who kind of popularized the idea of what a biological species is. So like if you think about what's a species, everyone's like, oh, a horse can't mate with a donkey. It produces a mule, and the mule can't reproduce. That's different species. That idea was popularized by Ernst Mayr because he came up with the biological species concept. He got his start in field ornithology on this expedition. And his experiences in the Pacific actually led him to think about speciation at such a granular level that, was so influential for the rest of the world, at least in evolutionary biology. And as I like to always bring it back to my dissertation, my study species was one of the ones that he used in his chapter where he described allopatric speciation, which is the major model in which speciation is known to occur. He used the birds that I studied for my dissertation. So,
Wow.
Very cool.
I used the birds that he studied for my dissertation, really, is what happened. He did it 100 years ago.
Yeah, but you showed how truly bizarrely complex. It's way more complex than Ernst Mayr ever could have imagined. Things that are happening on those islands. A lot of it makes no sense.
It does.
It's insanely complicated with birds doing things you wouldn't imagine, and that we couldn't have known about 10 years ago because we wouldn't have had these kinds of data 10 or 20 years ago. So whole genome sequence data, along with specimens with very good locality information, can tell us all kinds of things now that we didn't know. So how these birds speciate, I don't know. I don't know what they do.
We know a lot. It's not like it's a complete black box, though. Like, I just went to the Ark. We know enough.
It's lack of gene flow.
It's
Wait,
not.
what was
though,
that, John?
John?
Lack of what?
Lack of gene
Lack of
flow.
what?
I don't
Okay.
think so. These ones don't comply to your innocent and naive notions of what
There
a
was
species
so much gene
is.
flow.
Well,
so
I
much
mean,
gene flow.
Yeah, I know.
Do you want to continue on to the kookaburra?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe it's a good time. Thanks everyone for listening, and thank you to Jenna for joining us. So we'll actually release our kookaburra episode in 2 weeks, and next week we have a very special surprise as we'll be joined by the guys from Extremely Accurate Bird Songs podcast. We're super pumped. Everyone have a lovely 4th of July, and please stay safe. We love you all, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks for listening.